I do think there's some themes that are consistent. The young population I talked about, the willingness to adopt technology, and then this pervasive growth of technology, AI. And whether you're a telco or a bank, the point I keep making is the mainframe software, particularly the 30, 40-year-old software, was developed when banking was a completely different paradigm than it is today. So our strategy is going to be much more a modernized in-cloud or on-cloud first, rather than migrate off the mainframe to cloud. Sure. From a retail customer point of view of the 12.5 million, we're about 4.6 million now are digitally active. Okay. And that's growing about 12% a year. From a corporate point of view, so these tend to be SMEs and obviously larger corporates, we've got about 80% of them now using our digital platform that we call Absa Access.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of ITWeb TV. I'm Adrian Hinchcliffe, Group Editor of ITWeb, and I'm joined today by Johnson Idesoh. I might not have got that right, but he'll correct me later on, I'm sure. He's the Chief Information and Technology Officer at Absa. It's going to be a fascinating discussion, I'm sure. But before we get started, if you're here for the first time or you're not already a subscriber, please remember to subscribe and like. Johnson, how badly did I do on your surname?
No, you did very well.
For the audience, please, how should I have said it?
So it's Nigerian. Let me give you the Nigerian pronunciation first. Idesoh.
Idesoh.
But I go by Idesoh.
Okay.
It's easier. So I'm part Nigerian. I had the pleasure of growing up in Nigeria. So my primary and secondary education was in Nigeria, and now I'm fortunate enough to be in South Africa.
Okay. I'll just refer to you as Johnson if that's okay. Cool. So welcome. It's a pleasure for you to join us today. I'm going to start you off with an easy question. I'd like to do that just to kind of get you into the swing of things. So if you can just tell us a bit about what your role is, what it covers, the kind of different tech areas that you cover, different business areas, and I guess the countries that you cover as well.
Sure, absolutely. I've got the privilege of being the Group Chief Information Officer for Absa Group. So we're on 12 markets across the African continent. We've got capital corridors in the US, the UK, and China now. And I'm responsible for technology, digital, and data across the bank. So we operate 5 key business units. Obviously, our markets outside South Africa, we refer to as Absa Regional Operations. Our 3 retail businesses in South Africa, and then our corporate CIB business, which is Pan-African. So I'm lucky enough in that I'm accountable end-to-end for that entire chain to our 12.5 million customers, and obviously to our Group Exco and to our board.
Okay. You've given us some kind of indication there of numbers. Perhaps if we can drill down into that a little bit more. You talked about the number of countries you're in. How many employees do you have? How many branches do you have? Just for those viewers who maybe aren't as familiar with Absa as we are here in South Africa, how many digital customers? Just give us a kind of...
Sure, absolutely. So as I said, we're in 12 markets on the African continent. In the west, Ghana. On the east, Kenya, and a lot of markets around there, Tanzania, etc. And then in southern Africa, we've got presence in Botswana, as an example. On the islands, we're in Seychelles and Mauritius, and then obviously in South Africa. So that's our spread from a market point of view. We're just over 30,000 colleagues. We call our employees in Absa. Just over 800 branches in South Africa. About 6,000 ATMs.
Okay. And then, obviously, all the banks are going digital. That's the way of the future. But what percentage of your customers are kind of going digital? I know we've got not legacy customers, but customers who are perhaps more traditionally focused, used to a branch, used to having, I don't know, a checkbook or whatever the case is. So how are you kind of transitioning that user base? And what kind of figures are you seeing in terms of...
So I will answer from both a corporate point of view and a retail point of view. Sure. From a retail customer point of view of the 12.5 million, we're about 4.6 million now are digitally active.
Okay.
And that's growing about 12% a year. From a corporate point of view, so these tend to be SMEs and obviously larger corporates, we've got about 80% of them now using our digital platform that we call Absa Access. So definitely it's an area we see of increasing adoption year in, year out.
Okay. So 80% corporate. Okay, that's interesting. So what's holding back the last 20%, do you think?
It's just timing, to be honest. This is a platform we've been invested in. Anyone who knows Absa's history will understand we went through a separations process in the late 2010s. And one of the choices we made was to invest in digitalizing our corporate business. So the remaining 20% is really just a matter of time and making that shift.
Okay. And how are you finding those kind of corporate, or maybe not the corporate, but the consumer customers, the retail customers are kind of adapting to digital? As I said, I mean, I think a lot of them are going to be used to perhaps more your kind of branch way of banking. And I guess, is the branch still relevant in the current environment in the future?
I think to answer that question, I'm going to talk a bit about the demographics of our continent. So one of the things I always remind people about the African continent is we're the youngest continent on the planet, average age under 20. So that says we've got a population that actually is very adapted to technology. We've also got a population, clearly, that is growing economically. So therefore, the cost of banking and financial services is important, and clearly use of technology there is key. So we simply are of the view that adoption is going to keep increasing. And the more and more capabilities we can put into customers' hands, the better. Having said that, we're also a universal bank. And what I mean by that is clearly we offer the transactional services, checking accounts, savings accounts, deposits. We offer wills. We offer insurance, both life insurance and short-term insurance. And clearly there's certain kinds of products where you want some empathetic human advice or interaction.
Yeah.
So when I'm asked this question about branches, I always say we will meet customers in a channel that is most convenient for them. And sometimes for the simpler things, paying a utility bill, buying airtime, etc. Of course, you will do that online. Making a simple transfer to your family, of course, you want to do that online. But if you're talking about financial planning, then you want to speak to a human. So really what we're talking about is making the bank a digital business, not just the channel, not just a mobile channel. So therefore, if you interact with us in a branch, you still have a digital experience because a colleague is digitally enabled. So that's how we like to think about digital, the future of the branch. Certain things will be done face-to-face. Certain things will be done purely digitally.
Okay. And then I guess we've talked about some numbers, but the hard-to-beat number, how big is your IT budget? And can you break that down into kind of rough percentage in terms of services, hardware and software?
So about 25% of our operating expense goes into technology. I tend not to quote the actual number, and I'll tell you why. Because we look at technology as a driver of business value rather than just a cost. But about 1 in 4 rand we spend goes on technology. A lot of that, about 3 billion, goes into digital transformation every year. And again, this is quite public. So you could split it between what we invest in digitalization. I've given you that number. And then, it's about 40% software, about 40% people, and the remaining 60% you can break almost evenly between hardware, software, services.
Okay. So something that we've done recently at ITWeb, so we have one of our brands, Brainstorm magazine, which has been going for years. We do an annual CIO survey. We presented the results recently, and I think not one of the surprise results, but I think when you kind of look at where the narrative around technologies goes, the top result in terms of most in-demand skills, and it's been the same result for 3 years running, is data analytics and BI. It beats cyber, it beats software development, AI. We've actually seen a decrease in cloud as a kind of more popular thing. So how does that square with your experience? And what's your take on why data analytics and BI, and this is across the board for CIOs from various industries, how do you think that's kind of...
The way I think about this is we live in the era of AI, and AI is built upon data. And then clearly you get to the data skills, your BI skills, etc. So that's how I interpret this. And the way I see AI is it's growing exponentially. It's not an overstatement in this case to use the word exponential. It's becoming embedded everywhere. Yeah. It's evolving rapidly. So that's how I make sense of that. We absolutely see it. And our strategy as to how we deal with this, there are 2 or 3 approaches. One approach is you have to grow skills yourself. It's inevitable. Yeah. And we've got a number of academies, of which there's a data science academy as one example. We also have a cyber one and a digital transformation one. And then second, of course, you have to encourage your own existing colleagues to reskill. So we invest a lot in that as well. But given the growth of AI, I'm not actually surprised by that conclusion from your research.
Okay, cool. And then this is always like one of those popular questions, but what's the top demand or the top priority from the business for the tech team?
There are always two.
Okay.
The first is clearly service and cybersecurity, particularly when you're a bank. Technology influences the reputation of the bank. So we're very proud in Absa of our service reputation and obviously our investments in security. So that is really foundational. But then, of course, there's digital transformation and really helping the bank compete on the basis of technology. Digital, data, and technology, I would say, is our second, and the rate at which we can adapt. Because, of course, I talked about AI being exponential. Technology is growing exponentially. And when you're in a bank like Absa, the important thing is the rate at which we can adopt the technology and get value from the technology. We also have to keep increasing.
So I think, part of that kind of transition is obviously the customers, and we've talked around that already. But we've obviously got staff, or you've got staff. You've probably got a lot more staff than I can count. So how do you ensure that staff across the organization aren't just kind of compliant with this technology, but are actually not resisting it, but really kind of embracing it? How do you make sure that you've got the buy-in when you start with digital transformation initiatives?
So let me give you a couple of examples as to what we do. The first thing we do in Absa, which may be different from how many look at technologies, we explain technology in the role of the bank's purpose. Because at the end of the day, we're here for our customers. So we're always keen to do that, link it to our values and link it to our brand. So if you've been in a town hall we've had recently, you'll see that very clearly. The technology priorities linked to that. The second is you create excitement because the world we live in is very exciting and the opportunity is very exciting. And then the third is you make it accessible. So let me give you a very, very specific example. We've trained probably about 6,000 people in generative AI. So we have these open come as you are sessions. Okay. We take you through training on how to leverage Gen AI. So do you demystify it first and foremost, and then you help people see it as an opportunity, which they themselves can then obviously skill in.
Okay, so generative AI was actually on my next question card, but let me jump to it now. What use cases are you finding within the bank? How is it being adopted? And there is that kind of fear of generative AI, and I didn't think it would kind of come from my job, but I can see ways that I can adopt it, but I could see ways that it would replace me or some of my colleagues if we went down that direction. So how do you deal with that kind of fear, but also what are your use cases?
Yeah, so from the fear side, part of the reason we've been so deliberate about training and demystifying is to help people become comfortable with it. Because otherwise it's just this narrative that you hear externally. So that hands-on experience is really, really helpful. I think like most companies, we did a lot of experimentation last year. I think we all did. Lots and lots of experiments. You could probably count them almost in the hundreds. When it comes to the actual use cases, the areas we're beginning to find it relevant, I'll give you a couple of examples. In our relationship banking business, clearly we deal with a lot of SMEs or sole proprietors, people growing their business. And in that client support, being able to use generative AI across that volume of information that you need to be prepared when you're a banker interacting with customers has, for us, been a really good use case. We actually published it with Microsoft just in June as one of the areas. So that's one particular area where you can see from a customer experience point of view, makes a big, big difference. Then other areas, and this I'd say we're exploring, but when you think about contact centers and customer service and linking generative AI to areas like next best action, etc., again, there's real power there. Let me also be frank. Generative AI, in terms of, I think, business value is still quite nascent, is still growing. Uh-huh. So we see it is going to keep growing exponentially, but those are just some of the early areas where you can see there's real business benefit. And the more you have skills and how you adapt the technology, it's important. I also want to go back to my view is in time it's going to be everywhere. So it's going to be embedded everywhere. So it's going to be less a case of having generative AI projects and more you use generative AI just as part of the technology suite you bring to solve customer problems.
So I think the question I've got around your adoption within, you mentioned the kind of retail bank, the commercial corporate bank with SMEs, is you're saying it's kind of going across a lot of data and is able to pull that. How hard is it to work with kind of the FSCA regulations and making sure that it doesn't suddenly pull random things and give out the wrong information? How do you make sure that that's not happening?
So two really fundamental areas. The generative AI I'm talking about is entirely within our own environment. So we certainly don't use the public Gen AI models in any customer servicing. And we've been very clear on that from the very start. It was one of the very first things that we've done. The second is it's an assistant. It's not a decision maker.
Okay.
And again, we're very, very clear about that. So it assists our colleagues. It's not a decision maker. The whole, as we know, we can see this globally, the whole regulation of AI is going to evolve very, very quickly. Mm-hmm. So we have a set of responsible use policies for AI as well, like most companies our size would. And, we've had those long before the zero
ChatGPT came along. Okay. AI is obviously at this kind of forefront of innovation, particularly at the moment. But, I mean, do you have something like an innovation lab, a kind of skunk works within Absa? And what are perhaps some of the examples of products that have come out of it, or how you kind of encourage that innovation and something that's kind of commercialized?
So we don't operate as skunk works per se. What we are trying to do is encourage innovation in the work and to ensure our technology teams are thought leaders in their own right. Then we have events like you'll have seen our hackathons. So we have events like our hackathons that we use as a point of focus. And the intent there clearly is to spark these ideas, to show in a very short space of time what we as Absa can do, and then with colleagues from across the bank, take the most innovative ones and pursue. So I know there's a lot of debate about skunkworks, research labs, etc. Our approach is much more, it's part and parcel of what we do day to day. Give our colleagues the opportunity to do that, and then have mechanisms where you can support and encourage innovative ideas and obviously shine a light on them and explore them.
So you're across the 12 countries in Absa. How are you, or what are you finding in terms of innovation from perhaps other countries that's coming into South Africa, or the other way around? How do you kind of encourage and grow that and kind of, I guess, create two-way dialogues between them?
So this is, the answer to that is our identity as Absa Technology. So I'm always very clear, we're not technology in South Africa or technology in Kenya or technology in Ghana. Our identity is Absa Technology. So it starts with the identity. The second then is the mechanisms we run where we share ideas. So if you joined an Absa Technology town hall, what you would see would be our team from Uganda presenting some of the work they've done, our team from Kenya presenting some of the work we've done, and then obviously our teams in South Africa. To your question about the areas, I would pick on three. The whole approach to mobile and finance on mobile in East Africa is very advanced. We all know about M-Pesa today.
Yeah.
We have a partnership with Safaricom through our bank in Kenya. And clearly, when you look across the continent, that's one example. The other area I would say would be payments, and particularly around West Africa. Mm-hmm. Nigeria, we don't have a retail banking, but Nigeria payments and the evolution of that payments landscape and the diaspora, so money coming into and out of the country, is an area we watch really, really carefully. And then in South Africa, one of the points I make about us in South Africa is, in my view, we've got one of the most innovative financial services landscapes in the world. It's a very competitive marketplace. We've got the more established banks like ourselves who've been in business for 100 years probably. And then, you've got the banks that are very new.
Yeah.
And I do think that makes South Africa a particularly dynamic environment, which we're really blessed to be in.
Okay. I don't know where to go next. I've got two questions, both coming to mind at the same time. But let's talk about the fintechs. I mean, you mentioned there that you're looking at what's going on in Nigeria. But how do you deal with fintechs? How do you kind of stay on top of what's going on? And are there any particular areas that you're looking at? Are there investments that you're making? Are there any in the pipeline that we'll see announcements coming out about soon that you'd like to break exclusively here on ITWeb TV?
On that one, obviously, I can't talk about things we might be about to do, but let me answer the question on how we keep abreast, how we think about investments, etc. So the first thing is we constantly scan the market for fintechs, and we look on the African continent and we look globally. Mm-hmm. So we certainly look into Southeast Asia, the Chinese ecosystem, the Indian ecosystem, and then obviously North America and Europe. So we are constantly scanning. And we do that very regularly, and we report on that very regularly. So that's one dimension. The second dimension, of course, in our corporate business, we have a business that invests in fintechs. And again, it's quite public. So we partner with them to also understand, how they are seeing the landscape. The third is, of course, we're close to a number of venture capitalist funds, both in South Africa and internationally. And again, you track where they're investing. There is one fintech we have invested in quite publicly, an agricultural-based fintech in South Africa. So there's an example of where our strength in relationship banking, particularly in the agriculture sector, you take into a fintech that serves the agriculture sector, and you can see the symbiotic nature of that kind of relationship. Do we see fintechs as a threat or an opportunity? The answer is both.
Okay.
To be frank.
Yeah.
And to me, this takes you into how one thinks about an ecosystem and a network, because clearly in a connected world, sometimes your competitor will also be your collaborator. So that's how we think about a number of these fintechs. Sometimes in direct competition, sometimes not. And again, you look at areas like payments, and you can see that mindset very much in how we approach the market.
Okay. So talking about competitors that could become collaborators that might become competitors again, I think there's been a lot of kind of interplay between, or blurring of the lines between, traditional banks as you've tried to kind of adopt more mobile services with the MVNO and kind of selling handsets, etc. And also the mobile operators are more pushing into the traditional financial services space. How do you see that playing out over the next few years? Do you see a future where you'll be working together? Do you see mergers in the future? Share your insights.
If I had a crystal ball, I could answer the question on mergers.
We have a crystal ball right here.
Okay. Let me look into that a second. The way I think about this is you can clearly see telcos, mobile operators are moving into adjacencies, a statement of the obvious. I talked about M-Pesa a moment ago. You can clearly see banks are moving out of traditional financial products. That will continue.
Mm-hmm.
I do think partnerships are critically important. And I do think being very clear, as Absa, our right to win, and if you're a telco, your right to win, and always remembering what we're trying to do is obviously increase financial inclusion, financial access to our customers. So always looking at it from that dimension. So sometimes you compete, as I've said. Sometimes you will collaborate. I do think there's some themes that are consistent. The young population I talked about,
mm-hmm.
the willingness to adopt technology, and then this pervasive growth of technology, AI. And whether you're a telco or a bank, I think you have to understand that. So I think the keyword I'd stop with is partnerships. There will need to be really strong partnerships focused on the customer. And that will sometimes mean, the telco leads. Sometimes it will mean the bank leads. And then the final point I do need to make is regulation is clearly catching up quickly.
Okay.
You can certainly look, I think Europe is a good case in point right now, where you got some of these fintechs who essentially are providing financial services, but are not seen as banks or financial services. You can see that regulation is changing because it fundamentally comes down to the experience the customers get, the security the customers get, and the need to ensure that whether you're with a established brand or one of these fintech brands as a customer, that level of protection and the level of soundness in this financial system is really important to protect.
Okay. So a similar question, and I'm conscious there might be some crossover, but what does either the bank of the future or the Absa of the future in sort of 10 years' time, where do you see that going? What do you think it will be like?
I'm also smiling because when I started work, I used to talk about 5-year plans. Now I talk about 3-year plans.
Okay.
If I'm lucky.
Yeah.
But to try and answer this question, I talked about digital transformation earlier on, and it's a phrase we've been using for many, many years now. We're at this point in time where, in my view, you must be a digital business.
Uh-huh.
Not just a channel, you must be a digital business, front to back, which means you must be obsessed with customers. You must be very adept at data and how you use data, going back to the point on AI. And then, of course, you literally become an organization that is a bit like a tech company with a financial services license. So that's where I think we are going. Telcos will be no different. Pharmaceuticals will be no different. And And that then, of course, is a different kind of structure and organism than we know today. I do think the banks that are more adaptable will do better, by which I mean your speed of response to changing circumstances, to changing customer expectations. I think they will do better. And I do think there's plenty of compelling evidence that the banks that are more digitally transformed perform better. They've higher customer satisfaction, better cost-income ratio. I'm sounding like I'm a finance person now. But I do think that's true, and there's quite compelling evidence. So that's the bank I see of the future, or the financial service organization of the future. Almost, it becomes a very diverse, networked organization, hugely digitally powered. And that's how you get to more customers, increase customer satisfaction, reduce cost to serve, etc.
How do you see super apps? So we've got WeChat in China, and one of my colleagues was recently out in China and told me how pervasive it is to anything that you want to do. And obviously China is a very different political system. But how do you see those kind of operating or kind of progressing in the African environment?
Yeah, that's something we've also spent a lot of time thinking about. I would also add M-Pesa as a more local example, which is almost like become a super app. To me, it's the networked economy and it's the ecosystem that sits underneath it. That's how I think about it. Now, you're quite right in saying China is a particular context. Kenya is also a particular context. There will be our own realities. I do think they'll become more and more pervasive, simplistically because of the seamless ease from a customer point of view. I do think banks, retailers, really any organization that is B2C will have to be very deliberate about how they play a part in these ecosystems. Because if you do it well, there's a huge benefit. The thing about these ecosystems is the disproportionate advantage you get as you scale. Very low cost, close to zero cost. And the competitive tension will be how do you partner with super apps, but keep your own unique value. And I think, frankly, most organizations are still trying to work that out. But I do think as a theme, it's one of these things we will see more and more simplistically because adoption, customer experience is going to drive that quite ferociously.
Okay. So one area that I would like to talk around is technology. We've got kind of often focus on these cutting edge technologies. I'm not saying cloud is a cutting edge technology. I think it's constantly evolving. But where are you on your cloud journey? What types of services are being moved to the cloud in Absa? What can't be moved? And what is the future of mainframes at Absa?
So it's funny you asked me this question. This is very topical right now. Absa was actually one of the first banks on the continent to start leveraging cloud. It goes back to 2016, 2017 in my memory. I wasn't in the bank at the time. So Absa actually was quite a pioneer at that. Absa's been a pioneer at cloud on-premise. So we do have outpost devices for the more technical people. They sound like jet engines when they start up. I have to say I was there when we started them up last year. The reason we are driving cloud adoption is we want the business agility. We want the access to innovation. The example I use internally with all my stakeholders at the moment is generative AI. How are you going to leverage generative AI unless you're astute at leveraging cloud? The volume of compute you need and data you need. There's no other way you do it. The automation of security controls and obviously the automation of operational controls. I talked about our pride in being one of the most reliable banks in our markets. Again, clearly that's something you have to keep investing in. And then, of course, cost. But the cost story is more your scaling cost. How do you double, say, your number of customers, but only increase your costs by, say, 10, 20%, a fraction thereof? So we're always clear that's where we are. We're about a third way through our cloud adoption journey right now. We've got a number of platforms as software as a service, the ones everyone knows, Salesforce, Workday, ServiceNow. We've got a lot of applications already on cloud, so a lot of our payments infrastructure already leverages cloud underneath, of course. And we're going to drive that a lot more over the next plan period, which in corporate speaks next 2 to 3 years. What isn't going to move to cloud? We've been clear. Our intent is not to migrate mainframe to cloud. I know some companies have chosen to do it. our point of view is that whenever we adopt cloud, clearly we're looking for the business value first. So to replace mainframe as an infrastructure with cloud as an infrastructure, the point I keep making is the mainframe software, particularly the 30, 40-year-old software, was developed when banking was a completely different paradigm than it is today. So our strategy is going to be much more a modernized in cloud or on cloud first, rather than migrate off the mainframe to cloud. So we'll have a mainframe. Many big banks will have a mainframe for a long, long time. I always remark to people, 3/4 of US banks still run on mainframes. So that's a reality. But I do think AI, data, cloud, the ability to have this cloud almost in premise, you can have micro clouds, particularly in markets where regulation requires that, I think is actually something that's going to continue to drive. So we are driving our cloud adoption significantly for the reasons I've just outlined, and we'll be doing that for the foreseeable. One other point, we're also encouraging our own colleagues to train in cloud. So this year alone, close to 1,000 colleagues in Absa Technology have gained additional cloud certifications. We do that for two reasons. Clearly, it helps our strategy execution. But two, it's building leading technical skills in our countries. And that, again, is part of our philosophy. The skills we need to really leverage this data and AI, we must encourage and build in the countries we've got present.
Okay. The next technologies, I've got a list of 4 or 5 that I'd like to kind of cover. Let's move on to blockchain. I think blockchain came out and it's kind of, I don't want to say the hype has kind of been, the cryptocurrency hype has kind of taken over, but I'm starting to see Web3 is kind of coming up a bit. What's the Absa perspective on blockchain? Are you using it? Where are you using it? Where would you see a use case for it?
So blockchain, you're right. It's one of these technologies that came out and there was a lot of expectation and it's declined. Yeah, I suspect longer term it's going to be one of these. I always say to people, blockchain makes internet secure. That's how I simplistically define it. And so, I mean, we're particularly interested in 2 areas. I would say the whole area of a stable coin is one area that we think is only over time going to become more and more prevalent. And, I think the jury is still out. Will it be company-backed or country-backed, central reserve bank-backed, etc.? But you can just look across the world and you see a lot of companies and regulators or central banks looking at that. And I think that's one theme. The second theme is the whole area of identity. And Absa actually was, again, a forerunner. Absa had a number of partnerships with other banks, I know 5-6 years ago, looking at the idea of digital identity. Because, again, if we think about one of the challenges today as a customer, of course, it's onboarding and your identity verification, et cetera, et cetera. If I go back to the internet being trusted, that for me is another really interesting use case. What I find quite exciting in South Africa right now is just last week, it was the SAP Payments Conference. This whole concept of digital identity, again, now is being driven from the central bank. And that, I think, could be this game changer that creates a center of gravity in a way that allows us to do that. I've always personally thought there's no reason why on the African continent we can't lead on blockchain and its use, for instance, in digital identity, payments, the stable coin type idea. So those are 2 specific areas. We continue to work on it. This is one area where we have had a team. And we continue to have a team focused on blockchain technologies. And you may have seen we published a thought paper a few months ago on blockchain. So it's an area we're very active in.
Okay. And then to talk more, I guess, common cryptocurrencies, I saw recently that Zapper, I think, which is the kind of digital payments app, is integrating with, I think it's Luno. So that kind of currency exchange. So now if you're able to pay by Zapper, you're able to pay by Bitcoin effectively. That seems to be the way it's going. The FSCA has recently licensed, it's 100 plus crypto exchanges. What's the Absa take on like crypto becoming a fiat type currency, a kind of more regular everyday currency?
The short answer is we're expecting it to happen.
Okay.
So when I refer to areas that are coming, and we, like many banks, are looking very carefully at this area.
And how do you think that will change your operations?
Oh, significantly.
Okay.
Very significantly. I think there's our operations. There's just even more beyond that, what customers were able to do.
Mm-hmm.
And the friction you can take out of a lot of customer experience today. So, again, it's still quite early. I think it still has to scale. But again, certainly that's one of the areas that we're working on and watching very carefully.
Okay. And how ready are you to jump once the green light has been given? Is that a no comment?
That's what I can't really go into. But you can get from what I'm saying. It's an area we're watching extremely closely, and our blockchain team clearly is close to.
Okay, we'll leave it at that. Now, there's two other topics that I think are a bit more kind of science fiction, and probably one of them has come out of science fiction in some ways, is the Metaverse. Now, though, there's a other bank which has put a stake in the ground, or a virtual stake in a virtual ground in Ubuntu land. What's your take on the Metaverse? Is it a gimmick? Is it something serious? Is it something that Absa is kind of looking at and, yeah, we could use it in certain ways in certain places?
So we've not bought a stake in the Metaverse, but we certainly have active work underway in the Metaverse. We see it, the first areas we see it being really useful is onboarding colleagues to the bank.
Okay.
Almost as a way of inducting them into Absa. And again, it's one of these interesting dynamics we now live in, of course. I mean, post the pandemic, we live in a world where hybrid is here to stay. So a lot of the previous ways you onboarded people into an organization was I brought you to a physical location. The Metaverse does away with that kind of thing. So these sorts of more immersive experiences, absolutely. As we speak today, we have an example where we're able to do that. And we're not alone. I know many of the consultancies already use the Metaverse for that. So again, I think it's one of these technologies that goes through a hype cycle, comes down, and then over time you start to see it kind of emerges. And a bit like my comment on AI, you start to find it's less a project in the technology space and more it becomes part of a solution that, you use to deliver to customers and colleagues.
Okay. And then the last one, which I'd like to touch on, is quantum. I think maybe 5-6 months ago, I was speaking to your colleague Manoj, and we discussed quantum, and he kind of set me straight on my expectation of when it was like, it's a long way off, and he was like, oh no, it's a bit closer than you think. So what's the Absa perspective on quantum? What's your perspective on it?
Manoj has that habit of setting me straight as well.
Okay.
Quantum computing is a very, very interesting topic. If you'd asked me about quantum computing 2021, I would have said it's a decade away. Early this year, the pleasure of sitting down with some quantum researchers, and you realize there are quantum computers available today.
Okay.
When you realize that, I mean, don't get me wrong, they're not yet scalable. There's still issues with reliability, et cetera, but the truth is there are a number of companies today that you can buy a quantum computer from. So this is an area actually we've got an acute focus on, and we're talking about to our colleagues across the bank about the potential it may bring. So I think the first area that quantum computing will present is the threat one, security.
Yeah.
But very quickly thereafter, in areas like risk modeling, think of AI powered by quantum. I use the word exponential. I don't know what the next word is.
Yeah.
I do think there's a fair chance before this decade is out, we will start to see some of that. And again, when people ask me, what's the urgency in digital transformation? What's the urgency in data or adopting AI and cloud? My answer is, it's preparing you for this next frontier, which in my view, I think is closer than many of us realize. So that's, again, not a prediction. It's just having looked at this more and more over the past 2 to 3 years, I'm getting the sense it's an area that is evolving fast. Okay. On the one hand, it's probably like classical computing was 40, 50 years ago, but it's not going to take 40, 50 years for quantum to mature beyond the level we've done in classical computing. So I think it's a really exciting area of quantum computing.
Yeah. I won't ask you to explain how it works.
I don't understand. I spent time with some PhDs.
Yeah.
I still don't understand quantum mechanics. I'll be perfectly honest.
That was I came out from a session at Microsoft, and I also, I think my eyes were looking in different directions.
I'm exactly the same. I walked away after these 2 days and I said, I still don't understand quantum mechanics, but I can begin to appreciate the potential.
Yeah.
I'm exactly the same. And I think, like a lot of things in technology, on a serious note, this is also it. When we explain it, not going into the technical complexities, rather focusing on the opportunities it creates is going to be what's important.
Sure. Okay. So I think that's my harder questions done. One question I'd like to ask you, I think it's a challenge particularly, and I think, again, it was something I asked Manoj, with the CISO, that they have to be constantly on. They have to be kind of aware that something could happen at any point. How do you as a CIO get that work-life balance? And how do you ensure that your teams are getting that work-life balance? Because obviously you've got deadlines to meet, you've got projects to deliver. Yeah, how are you getting it right between delivering but also making sure that people are mentally well?
I'm not sure I'm getting it right, first of all, but some of the things I try and do. I say to everyone, look after your well-being. Because the truth is, if you're not well in yourself, it's not good for your family, first of all, and it's clearly not good for you at work. So actually, Absa isn't going to get the best from you if you're not well. So that's one of the things I always say to people and encourage people. To do that, you do need some discipline. So you do need some boundaries. So I tend to be very disciplined about what I spend my time on, and I encourage people to do that. So prioritization is something I really encourage with everyone. Because the truth is, human beings, we can do a few things in parallel and we can do them well. And when you get in the situation, we're trying to do too much. So I often do say that. So discipline, boundaries, knowing how to prioritize. And then, end of the day, the world we live in, you have to integrate your work and your life. So that's another thing I encourage. And then back to discipline. When you're on holiday, go on holiday.
Yeah, agree.
So some people are surprised I switch my phone off. But there's a deputy when I'm away. Mm-hmm. So someone will answer the call. And if they really need me, they know how to get hold of me. So I would say don't fall into the trap of believing you are so critical or important. And I'm not diminishing any of our roles. But you have to realize your well-being is the most important thing. Keep yourself well. It's best for you. It's best for your family. And obviously, that's how Absa also benefits. But it's a complex challenge for all of us in this day and age when everything's always on and you're always accessible. Mm-hmm. So the answer is you just really need to be disciplined, and I certainly try and encourage that.
Okay. So then my final question, it's a free hit. What question didn't I ask you that you'd like to answer? And you may answer it.
I may answer it. Maybe going back seriously just for a second, how do we see ourselves in technology in Absa? Because there are two things in particular we are trying to do with technology in Absa. The first is, and I mentioned it several times, we see ourselves as a digital transformation partner for the bank, not the tech function. Because if you see yourself just as an infrastructure provider or a provider of applications in this day and age, I think you quickly become irrelevant. The second is, where do you see yourself? And I talk very much about we're a Pan-African bank, but on a global stage. The point there I'm making is the markets we're in, the technology we're using is equal or better to what you can find anywhere else. So for me, that's quite important because you shift your mind from being more traditional technology to really being part of how your business from a long term is competitive.
Okay. Johnson, that draws us nicely to a close. Thank you for visiting us today. That was Johnson Idesoh, Group Chief Information and Technology Officer at Absa. If you've enjoyed this discussion, please remember to like, share and subscribe. Thank you.